Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part there for the 20th of September 2025. Sorry, this is very late. Both my boys are playing football at the moment and I had to go to matches and whatnot. Both teams lost 3-2. Both boys played amazingly, but wasn't to be. And for my 20 plays in the A-League, I was hoping that they were going to win the A-League this season, and they just lost 3-2 to a team that'll be vying for that top position. So, God damn it. Anyway, I'm wearing a Canada top today because the Canadian women's, and this is rugby top, Canadian women's rugby team played insanely well in the World Cup against New Zealand, beat them. Some people say they stunned, but no, they've been playing that well for a long time. Anyway. Let's start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them linked in the description below. 1,070 personnel lost. So that's over 1,000 again for the second day in a row, which is unusual for this time period. 1 single tank, 2 troop carrying AFVs, typically very low. No MLRS or anti-aircraft warfare systems. 31 artillery systems. That's above the daily average quite successfully. And 124 vehicles and fuel tanks is very high in that category. And that suggests that the Russians are attacking or that the Ukrainians are striking bases with equipment, taking out cars on logistics roads, or all of the above. I did a sort of breaking news Ukraine war update extra last night, very late, 1:30 it was, I think, when I was looking at the strikes that have taken place with these FP2 drones, and I think the Ukrainians are successfully striking significant bases at the moment, and the Russians are going to be losing both personnel and equipment in those strikes. Anyway, we're going to look at a couple of different nuggets. We're going to start with stuff concerning personnel, as I usually do. Russia and Iran are recruiting mercenaries from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen to fight in Ukraine. So the understanding here is that both Russia and Iran are doing recruitment for Russia. So two countries recruiting soldiers into Russia, and they're doing that in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen. This is a worry. Ukraine have been under the cosh due to Russia having way more personnel than them right throughout this war. And at the moment, Russia seems to be much more able to generate boots on the ground from other countries. North Korea has helped them to a really significant degree. And I think if North Korea hadn't come and helped them in the way that they did, then the war would actually look slightly different. I think the North Korean engagement in the war has been a game changer. Now, you might not have seen the game change, but the game would have been very different. But, it was probably going a little bit like that. The Ukrainians were doing well in Kursk. The Russians were under the cosh, particularly in Kursk. And then they got 15,000 North Koreans, a whole bunch of self-propelled guns, and howitzers and all sorts of other bits and pieces. Type 71, isn't it? Multiple launch rocket system, blah, blah, blah. Coxswains and etc. And then they were able to kind of maintain the trajectory they were on rather than start struggling more. So I think it really did change the game, the North Korean involvement. But you've got so many others. I reported yesterday that there was a claim from Ukrainian intelligence that there are 20,000 Cubans fighting for Russia. If they are able to get even like modest numbers of people from these countries and put them together, these are just troops that get thrown into the meat grinder. They don't have to care about pain and compensation where they do for their own indigenous fighters. So I think this is an absolute bonus for, if I'm looking at this from a really non-human compassion point of view, just from a human resource point of view, where these resources are just numbers rather than human beings, then Russia is just able to plug the gaps with loads of people from all over the shop, and it's arguably going to cost them less money to do so and be less costly politically for the Russians by not sending their own people to die unnecessarily in a foreign land. They're sending foreigners to do that for them. They don't have to pick up the PR disaster for that. So this is very useful for the Russians, and I think the Ukrainians really struggle in being able to do anything remotely similar to this. They are trying to apparently recruit 1,000 foreigners a month, the Ukrainians, but they're going to be paying them, I presume, properly. And there's that very big concern of the more foreign soldiers that die, the more that will upset allied nations, etc., etc. So Russia is actively recruiting Middle Eastern mercenaries for the war in Ukraine, offering $3,000 to $8,000 and the promise of Russian citizenship after 6 months of service. So, of course, they are suffering in terms of a really bad demographic outlook. This is the same as Ukraine. Ukraine has the lowest infancy rates and the highest mortality rates, which means they're getting squeezed at both ends. More people dying, fewer people being born. The Russians have a pretty similar situation. Their demographic outlook has been appalling for many years, and the war has really hurt them. We probably aren't hearing the true statistics, but it's going to be hurting them. So this makes a lot of sense, which is come and fight for us, and if you don't die, we'll give you citizenship and you can come and work in Russia, even though the Russian population at the moment is looking fairly xenophobic. Didn't help that the Crocus City Hall terrorist atrocity where quite a few, was it 150 odd people died there a year or so ago. I can't remember when it was, a year and a half, 2 years ago. That involved, was it Tajiks or Uzbeks who did that? And there was I think it was Tajiks, and then there was a really big kickback against the Tajik population in Russia, and actually anyone that was Muslim or foreign. So there is, I just watched a video, literally just about 10 minutes ago, watched a video of a doctor who was recording himself on his phone from the desk up to his face, but obviously he couldn't record the patient, and the patient was just racially abusing this doctor for just being foreign, even though he had done an amazing job, well, a normal job, I don't know, done the job of a doctor in taking this patient in, diagnosing them, giving them a treatment, giving them a drug regimen, and the guy's just like racially insulting him. And he's just really calmly recording it. And he's just like, that is, it seems commonplace in Russia. So there are these ethnic tensions, these racial tensions that exist. But at the same time, Russia needs to be thinking about, well, if we can't have 20 kids for every family, then we are going to need to grow our population to allow for the economy not to completely tank. We're going to have to take in foreign people. And that's obviously not ideal for what the population is desiring, it appears. Now, General Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainians, has said the operation of the Defence Forces of Ukraine in Donetsk in the Dobropilya direction is ongoing. Now, there are still various claims about this, but actually I'm hearing from Russians that it's pretty disastrous for the Russians at the moment. The advance of our troops in the enemy's defence depth is from 3 to 7 kilometres. Control has been restored in 7 settlements. 9 have been cleared of enemy deep reconnaissance groups. In total, 160 square kilometres have been liberated during the operation, and another 171 square kilometres have been cleared of DRGs. The losses of the Russian aggressor in personnel during this time amounted to 2,456 people, of which 1,322 are irretrievable, so 1,322 dead. The exchange fund has been significantly replenished. Now, that seems to be lower death stats and wounded and KIA stats than we previously heard, but I don't know what the time frame is that he is using here. But he says the occupiers have also lost 817 units of weapons and military equipment. Of these, 12 were tanks, 37 armoured combat vehicles, 162 artillery systems. So it shows you, it's just fascinating. And you'll understand from the next stats that the Russians simply aren't using tanks and IFVs like they used to. Multiple launch rocket systems, 5 of those, 382 vehicles and 58 motorcycles. So you've got 430 of these unarmored bits of kit against 50 12 and 37, so broadly 50 pieces of combat asset equipment, and that's just an insane ratio, and that's why we keep having days like this. 1 tank, 2 AFVs, and 124 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's just what they're using on the front lines now. Now, I'm going to not read you this whole Kupiansk piece from Playfra. This is from the 18th, so 2 days ago, but it's just this anecdote at the end here. Also, very recently, an interesting event happened. A Ukrainian tank was able to break through east of Kundrashivka. So this is Kundrashivka is there, I think. So breakthrough here, I presume this arrow is what he's talking about. A Ukrainian tank was able to break through east of Kundrashivka, but was not able to fulfill its firing mission because of Russian drones. 10 plus Russian drones attacked it, with some of them being Lancets. 5 plus FPV drones struck the tank successfully. 3 missed or were neutralized by electronic warfare, and a Lancet also missed by about 10 meters. In the end, the crew demonstrated honestly balls of steel, did not abandon the vehicle, and somehow dragged it back to a safe place. This is phenomenal. First of all, it talks of how well protected some of these tanks are becoming in terms of probably ERA, explosive reactive armor, being placed on it, and I don't know what else they might have had on board. But it also shows you the prevalence of drones. There are almost swarms of drones around such vehicles as they attack, and that's the same for both sides, of course. Now, here we have, I talked to you in my military aid, really big old military aid update. There's so much going on at the moment, and that was almost a 2-hour live stream, and I know some people get frustrated that they go on so long, but there was that much information to discuss, plus it's a live, so you have a bit more chit chat. But I talked about how I did a thread on how the Ukrainians are using these triggers really successfully at the moment with regard to drones, having these often magnetometers or gyroscopes, or different ways of triggering, and also timers triggering these explosions. So if you these mines and explosives. So if you didn't watch that, basically you've got these different electronic boards that are relatively small, so let's say that big, right? And they can work by either tipping them or by having a sense of a magnetic field that if that gets changed, it then triggers an explosion. That can also be, I believe, timed. And then there was also, I think, triggering drones then to come in and drop something. So there were lots of triggering things going on. Now, it was interesting that the magnetic field change wasn't necessary. So you can have this situation where these are hidden in a box or a bag or whatever. And if someone comes nearby and they've got lots of metal on, like a soldier will, so your magazines, your rifle, whatever, then it can trigger a magnetic field change and then explode. But also if metal suddenly goes. So if you take over a Ukrainian dugout, it will be potentially booby-trapped with a bunch of stuff. So it might have an ammo box with a rifle on top, and someone says, oh, I need a rifle, I've lost my rifle, whatever. Take this half-decent rifle, and you move the rifle off the box, put it around your shoulder, and then that change of magnetic field then triggers the bomb that's inside, the explosives that are inside that box, and then you blow up, right? And apparently these are quite common now. The Ukrainians are doing a really good job with playing around with fuses and triggers and etc. And here we have remote mining from Baba Yaga big octocopter drones, or hexacopter really. Remote mining is working according to Max 25 here. All that remains of Russian Bukanka here, which was transporting ammunition after hitting a magnetic mine. So then you get these mines that are dropped by drones that are triggered by metal. So not a pressure mine necessarily, but metal coming nearby. And then bang, and that's what's left of a Bukanka, absolutely violently disassembled. Russians complain that the number of such cases has increased significantly in the last few days. So the Ukrainians are having a lot of success with explosives and mines that are triggered in a number of different ways and in a number of different contexts as well. Anyway, Z bloggers, we're moving on to talk about Russian information spaces actually starting to panic. And a number of different sources are saying this. Make of it what you will. Z bloggers, says the analyst, are starting to realise the reality of their war. Just been watching Kalashnikov and a couple of others talk about watching the penny drop. They're finally understanding the war is lost and they're never going to win. But perhaps most extraordinary of all, that if they try to carry on, the economy will tank beyond saving, and they will not be able to fight. That will leave them facing onerous terms from the enemy they can do nothing to stop. In other words, they feel Putin is dragging them towards disaster. They'll have to withdraw from most of the occupied territories and face never having the opportunity to reincorporate Ukraine ever again. They've got even to the stage where they recognize that Ukrainians will now always hate them, and it will be impossible to stop them becoming a liberal democracy in the EU. He's probably going to get arrested for it, but he's not alone. And we're going to come on to that in a second, because another one is looking like he's persona non grata. So finally, the Z bloggers have caught on. They see defeat around the corner unless the war ends now. Putin doesn't want that, so defeat it will have to be. Okay, so that's one. That's Kalashnikov, but he says also a couple of others. Here's another Russian banker that writes, and each time, quote, and each time advancement becomes more difficult, or rather advancements looks like this in most cases. A pair of soldiers advances, the Ukrainians close in, and the OSINTers map out the territory behind us, all happy with the video. And no one cares that those two soldiers simply died under airdrops, when in reality there's no progress, and there are vast grey kill zones into which soldiers are thrown again and again because they're ours. After all, they've been painted over by the cartographers. Well, to sum it up, for the haters, if the West manages to break us and defeat us, then you haters will also be destroyed, and your cries about how everything is actually fine and we won't help you. So these are quite damning indictments of the situation by these Russian Varenkos. Here's another one. This is Roman Alekin, who is quite prominent, and we're going to talk about him in a second. So there's a thread on him because the government has declared him a foreign agent. In other words, there are really bad signs coming from Russian war bloggers, and the government doesn't like it. Remember what happened to Evil Gherkin, right? Igor Strelkov, or Igor Gherkin, who was arrested and put in prison because he was being too critical from an ultra-nationalist pro-war point of view of the Russian government and Putin, what he calls Grandpa Putin or whatever he is. Another Russian military blogger, says War Translated Roman Alekin, has been labelled a foreign agent by Russian authorities over pro-war bloggers. Other pro-war bloggers are reportedly growing nervous, predicting a, quote, soon farewell, whatever that may mean. So here we just quickly go through the claim here. The Ministry of Justice of Russia recognised Roman Alekin as a foreign agent with the following wording. Alekin took part in the dissemination for an unlimited circle of persons of messages and materials of foreign agents. He disseminated unreliable information about the decisions taken by the public authorities of the Russian Federation and their policies, as well as unreliable data aimed at forming a negative image of the servicemen of the Russian Federation. I used to think that foreign agents were those who received money for their public, journalistic or literary activities in Russia and thus worked for foreign states, and that the status of foreign agent first had to be proven, i.e. substantiated that a person received money and carried out corresponding activities. Also, it always seemed to me that there was an invisible barrier of common sense that would not allow labelling as foreign agents those who actively helped the front, directly or indirectly participated in the special military operation. Today, for a minor anonymous Telegram channel, it will simply be Chinese New Year. But judging by the wording of the Ministry of Justice, money is not a necessary condition, and the wording unreliable data aimed at forming a negative opinion of servicemen of the Russian Federation can be applied to anyone, to the most famous propagandists in the country, to me, or to a random woman whose husband was mobilized 3 years ago. I realize that with a level of such motivation for granting foreign agent status, anyone can become one. In general, the purge of the information space has begun. Soon, it seems, we will be saying goodbye. Wow. So that is either from Roman Alekin or someone else who is in the military blogging sphere, just spelling doom for military bloggers who are going to be threatened by the Russian government. So the Christo Wiki has this thread. The Russian government has declared prominent Russian war blogger Roman Alekin to be a foreign agent. To the alarm and bewilderment of many other Russian war bloggers, the move is linked to Alekin's recent scandal over fundraising war efforts. So there is more to this than just reporting accurately or critically on the war. Actually, he was involved in potentially embezzling. But anyway, I think, there's a lot of discussion here from different people, including that one we've just mentioned, which is quoted here by Chris Owicki. He goes on to say Belarus and Silovic is perplexed by that. So that's another war blogger is perplexed by the decision. Quote, yeah, there were some truly crazy posts and I can agree with a lot of them, but damn. I personally know people from the front lines to whom he actually supplied humanitarian aid and provided communications. Even that month in Akhmat, that's a +2. And yet the paradox is this. Pugacheva, who gives interviews and does more harm to the state through the media, hasn't been recognised as a foreign agent, while Alekin has been. I don't know, maybe we're missing something and something else will come out about him soon. But the story looks pretty bad. In any case, we're seeing for the first precedent linked in one way or another to the war blogger fundraising humanitarian aid principle. 2 years ago, I wrote that sooner or later, many authors, especially those involved in fundraising, would be investigated. It's just that the degree of responsibility would vary from person to person. Alekin has been recently caught in a scandal over his fundraising, and that's what we're talking about there. But yeah, they being declared a foreign agent is raising issues among other fellow war bloggers. I'm not going through this whole thread because it's an absolutely gargantuan thread. But yeah, people talking about cover-ups and all sorts. But also, just the war isn't going particularly well, and war bloggers are realizing that there is no really cogent and cohesive plan, I guess, set of objectives that are easily obtainable. And I wonder whether just Russians are really much more obviously recognizing this and communicating this. So, you know, like I've said for many years, in fact, I said just weeks after the war started when I wrote an article on this, Putin can't win the war. Like, his maximalist objectives cannot be achieved. So what are his plans? And is he just going to keep throwing people into a never-ending war? Because actually, if he pulls out of a war, it becomes a political disaster. So he kind of needs the war now, but the war is disastrous itself. And so this is a real dilemma for Putin. And now you've got war bloggers realizing, you know, the penny dropping, as the analyst says here, saying, well, the Ukrainians are always going to hate us now. I mean, we've lost them. We aren't one brotherly unison. That's just never going to happen. And, we're pariahs, international pariahs. We're taking huge losses and so on and so forth. It's just, it was surely bound to happen at some point, but there you go. Okay, moving on. So this is, I guess, in line with what I've been talking about for weeks and weeks. The Ukrainians have been absolutely hammering Crimea, and indeed we've seen more evidence of that from last night and the night before. But it seems like Russia is still continuing to throw stuff into Crimea. So Russia, says the Euromaidan press, is fortifying occupied Crimea with cutting-edge air defense systems, even more than oil refineries, said Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmitry Platenchuk. Moscow concentrated its S-500 Prometry systems on the peninsula. It says systems there. I was aware they only really had one of these, and that was put on Crimea and was supposedly hit. These are worth roughly $600 million a pop. So, yeah, Kiev exploits blind spot in Moscow's air defense strategy as Russian prioritizes power over. This is a Euromaidan press, power over profits. The Russians clearly still piling stuff into Crimea then, because they see that as a priority, as a real, as the Euromaidan press here says, power over profits. That's how they can generate military power. If you lose Crimea, functionally, if not territorially, then everything becomes a lot harder in terms of the war, because that's your logistic routes up into Kherson Oblast and Zaporizhia, but also joins to Krasnodar Krai across the Kerch Strait, and there are still significant resources on Crimea, and it is just strategically a very important place for the Russians to keep. So they're piling in air defences to Crimea rather than putting air defences around the hydrocarbons facilities around the country. And that is clearly a decision they made, but it might not be a sensible one. Now, Anton Gerashenko talks, before we go on to the strikes section, about yet another CEO of a Russian entity ending up supposedly suiciding themselves, but really it looks like something more sinister. This guy, I saw the picture of this guy dead on the ground. He was on the pavement by his car. Like, it's a pretty odd place to commit suicide. Anyway, Russian media report the body of Alexander Tyunin, the CEO of the largest Russian composite materials producer, the Umatex group, has been found in the Moscow region, been found dead. It's reported that a rifle and a note were found next to him. According to preliminary data, the cause of death is a, quote, suicide amid depression. Tyunin's company, part of the Rosatom State Corporation, is the only producer of carbon fiber in Russia, which is used in the defense industry, aviation, space, and rocketry. Anyway, yet another CEO falling by the wayside there and supposedly committing suicide. Right, on to distant strikes. After a brief respite, Ukraine is expecting a new wave of Russian mass attacks, says the Kyiv Independent, on its energy infrastructure that could throw the country into blackouts this winter. It is looking pretty hairy for the Ukrainians. The Russians have ramped production back up. At least that's what it looked like. Then we've had a bit of a lull. But what happened last night? Well, last night we're back to huge waves again. 619 missiles and drones were sent into Ukraine. So Ukraine stopped 2 out of the 8 ballistic missiles that were sent. So 6 ballistic missiles got through. They stopped 29 out of 32 cruise missiles. That's a very good interception rate of cruise missiles. 3 therefore getting through. And they stopped 552 out of 579 drones. That's a 95% success rate. Extraordinarily good. For that many drones, that is very, very good. 27 drones getting through. Those are the numbers of drones that have been getting through recently when you've been having 130 odd drones, right? So to have 579 drones and still only have 27 getting through is an incredible success. Now, it's still 27 drones doing damage. And still, actually, all the ones that weren't intercepted will do some form of damage as they fall to the ground or onto a building or whatever, wherever. Obviously, 6 ballistic missiles is going to hurt because they could well be targeting the something more precisely than the drones, or with more devastation than the drones in terms of military-industrial complex or military infrastructure. This is, I think, evidence that the Russians are still able to throw in considerable numbers of drones. I was starting to wonder again whether the Russian supply chain had been hit for Shaheds, as we'd had a fair amount of time between the last big drone attack. But last night's was a big drone attack. And Ukrainians are going to be hurting. Although the interception rate is excellent for drones. That could be because they might have been throwing them at main cities rather than near the front line. Well, actually, it looks like a bit of both. So Kyiv was targeted, but not hugely. Chernihiv likewise. If you look where all these drones going, major drones going for Dnipropetrovsk. That was under a really big focus. Zaporizhia, the city of Zaporizhia as well. It looks like Odessa area, as well as, I don't know if that's Mykolaiv up there or Kryvyi Rih. I think it's Mykolaiv actually. And then we've got down on Danube River Delta. I would have thought that is, or maybe even further. No, Danube is the border, isn't it? So that's probably Ishmael or Reni or somewhere like that. Then you've got a load on the front line. So that semicircle of settlements, possibly Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, Druzhkivka, that sort of area. And maybe even further into Seversk too. So using these possibly near the front lines, that could be where your 27 drones come from. The success of these drones, although look where they're coming from. So there was more time to intercept these drones here than had the drones there been sent from just across the border. It seems like the drones were sent from much further up in, say, Luhansk area, and that they were sent into Ukraine and then dog-legged back to hit those towns and cities very near the front line. And then back, as I mentioned, you got Dnipro. Maybe that's, I don't know where that is. Poltava. No, it's not. It's too far south of Poltava. That's Poltava. And another place there, and then somewhere more inland here. I don't know exactly where that is. Vinnytsia. Oh, that's that really long place, Koproprozhny or whatever. Anyway, south of Cherkasy. That seems to have been a major target. But yeah, Dnipro seems to have been the hardest hit or the most targeted. Tim White said 3 civilians are known to have been killed by Russia in the attacks. Poland again raises defensive fighters, but according to the latest statement, they chose not to intercept missiles for Ukraine. There are no reports of anything crossing the Polish border, though. So he said, taking me a while, but here's a summary of all the death and destruction I managed to find this morning, but this is 5 hours old still. Importantly, there will therefore be more damage, probably continued attacks actually in the morning time, and more deaths and injuries will emerge, sadly. Russia's huge attack, he says, a spit in the eye for those who want peace, has killed 3 and injured 28, but the numbers may well rise. Dnipropetrovsk, Dnipro, Pavlohrad, we've got what sort of places? Lots of people injured there being discussed. A high-rise building in Dnipro, private homes, garages, businesses, an enterprise catching fire in Pavlohrad. Khmelnytsky, 46-year-old man was killed there. 2 other people needed treatment. That's usually Khmelnytsky, but not always. Usually is something to do with the Starokonstantinov airfield. We've got Chernihiv region, Mykolaiv. Ballistic missiles hit Mykolaiv and Shaheds as well. Industrial infrastructure was hit. Fires broke out, so that could be part of the manufacturing for something that the Ukrainians are using at war. I don't know if Mykolaiv will be where they make the naval drones, since it is near the Bug River and near to where they would be using those. But anyway, industrial infrastructure hit there. Farm in that region too. Kiev region, quite a number of places were also targeted, and Odessa, a farm was attacked and agricultural machinery destroyed. But there, yeah, lots of video and footage coming out. Let's get some details, says Tim White. Photos of the video of the destruction caused by Russia. It's important that the world is reminded of the ongoing massacre. African nations selling their souls to support imperialism and genocide. Right-wingers in Western countries denying Putin's war crimes. So Tim White having a bit of an exasperated rant there at people's opinions, or maybe lack of opinions on Russia. Local officials in Dnipro say the ballistic missile contained cluster munitions and exploded just before impact for maximum harm to civilians. What a war crime. Most of the victims were in this apartment block where 1 person died and 26 were injured. And here we have first 3 posts in the mini thread are from Dnipro. 22 houses damaged there here, along with 8 schools and kindergartens, and electric transport depot and trolley buses were also targeted. Chernihiv region, lots of imagery coming out from there. But it doesn't look like it was the worst of nights for losses for the Ukrainians, which is good news. And yeah, other death came in Khmelnytsky. So there you go, some more imagery of what took place in last night's activities. Photos from the Mykolaiv region here. No deaths or injuries reported, but ballistic missiles and drones hit industrial targets in Dnipro is the claim here. So yeah, really challenging for the Ukrainians. Let's just see if there's anything else. Numbers are rising in Dnipro. 30 people were injured, 12 of whom have been admitted to hospital. Support is being supplied to by the local Red Cross and other volunteer agencies. And then we had the latest air raid alarm in Kiev was switched off only 40 minutes ago. He said 5 hours ago, though. No damage in this wave reported yet, but a few hours before, houses were damaged in Boryspil, while 5 cars were destroyed in Savivka, Borshachivka, and Obukiv saw both cars and buildings hit. And then you've got Odessa as well, suffering some. Farm warehouse was attacked there. Authorities say agricultural machinery, etc., was damaged and destroyed. That's a pretty. That is a very striking picture. Some of these pictures are. You look at them, and you say that's a beautiful picture, but it's of a horrific subject, and a subject that makes you rage. but it's a very striking picture. Anyway, so that's everything. That's, well, not everything. That is a bit of a taste of what might have happened or what has happened overnight in Ukraine. This is a cruise missile that slammed into an apartment block in Donetsk. Let's give you a sense of what it sounds like. Now, you can see it there come down really quickly, or past the cameraman really quickly. And then it comes down. I've turned the sound off because I get into a lot of trouble. But that seems to be a pretty massive explosion there in Dnipro, somewhere in Dnipro. So they are using cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and Shaheds to at least some effect. Here is an ATB warehouse in Dnipro also having missiles hit it. It seems to be a little bit worse for wear. We hear that, talking about these missiles that the Russians send, on September the 7th, so we're talking 2 weeks ago, a Kiev volunteer called Hrek shot down a Russian Kh-69 cruise missile with a Maxim machine gun. So these are these round-barreled machine guns that you see, I mean, they literally are sort of Second World War era onwards, being used in a number of different contexts. I've seen them mounted on vehicles. I've seen them mounted on the side of trenches, used to attack people attacking trenches. And here, one has taken down a cruise missile. Wow. The Kh-69 weighing 70 kilograms with a 310 kilogram warhead. That's a significant warhead. Normally requires advanced SAMs like Patriot air defense systems to intercept. But this time, no, someone with an old machine gun from the Second World War. Right, what did the Ukrainians do last night? Some serious damage, I think. Well, at least I hope. 2 refineries were hit. First one, Saratov oil refinery. That's up in the, it's up in Saratov near Engels, northeast of Ukraine. The oil refinery has had, I guess, a capacity of 7 million tons of oil per year. It's a third attack on this refinery since the 2nd of August. Previously, it was targeted on the 10th and the 16th of September. So 10th of August, 16th of September, and the 2nd of August. Wow. So this is a place that has taken a bit of a pummeling. Third attack there. And what the Ukrainians are doing is attacking these refineries multiple times so that they definitely take them out, definitely have an effect on their processing, rather than hit them and then return to them maybe 6, 7, 8 months later. They hit them and then hit them again a week later, thus disrupt the repairs or hit another part of the processing plant. That means even more repairs have to be done, and then it's knocked out for a considerable amount of time. Fire on the territory of the Saratov oil refinery. Attack is still ongoing, said Special Kherson last night. A tall column of flame rises above the territory of the Saratov oil refinery. I was trying to work out whether this was one of the flares that come off from the top of the chimney, but actually it's so big this that it can't be. It's, as you can see, lighting up the sky big time around the oil refinery. Then we hear that, well, not we hear anything else. There's another bit of footage, which is, again, very striking footage. This concerns a drone that's caught. So he catches the drone in its terminal descent. And it then blows up and causes a massive bang. I'm going to turn the sound off again. But that's a huge explosion by the sounds of it, as recorded there and uploaded to the internet. We're going to talk about that in a sec. The other place that was hit last night was Novokubiashevsk oil refinery. It was the second one targeted last night. The refinery has a capacity of 7.9 million tons of oil per year. It's the second time that's been targeted during the campaign of strikes on Russian refineries, and that was previously hit on the 2nd of August. Okay, and you can see that glowing in the background. Now, Tendar says not only the Saratov refinery, which produces over 7 million tons in oil products, was hit by the Ukrainian drones last night, but also Novokubiashevsk refinery in the Samara region the latter producing 7.9 million tons of oil products annually. So some serious stuff by the Ukrainians. Hopefully some success for them there. Tim White says, as well as hitting the refinery in Novokubishevsk, Ukraine claims another target in the Samara region of Russia. The Linear Production and Dispatching Station, LPDS, in Prosvet, 15 kilometers east of the refinery in Samara, was the other thing hit, according to Ukrainian intelligence. So a whole host of things possibly being hit. We also hear that Volgograd was attacked. The governor admits drone debris damage. No proof yet of direct hits, but local channel reports around 6 a.m. that I heard a drone over the house. It flew off towards factories in the Krasnokibarsky district. About 30 seconds later, a deafening explosion. So yeah, lots of activity on and near the front line and deep behind the front lines as well. Volgograd, as mentioned, was also attacked. The government admits, drone debris, no proof of direct hits there yet. We also see some firms data popping up in Crimea, and that kind of goes back to my previous point about the Ukrainians doing a good job of attriting Crimean assets on a nightly basis by the looks of it, and Russia seemingly not giving up on Crimea and throwing more equipment in there rather than protect their hydrocarbons bases. And that might be a decision that comes back to bite them on the arse. No report says during Ukraine's overnight strike on occupied Crimea, a hit was reported on a known Russian air defense position between Kurotne and Bagorova near Lake Chokrak. Local channels confirm signs of impact in the area. Firms data also shows fires in that sector. Then we have proof of a transformer that was hit the other day, and my goodness, what a difference a week makes. Here is a satellite imagery of the transformer before the ground. Well, it looks like the ground is brown here. I don't know if the sunlight change is having anything to do with that. But yeah, the transformer has certainly been destroyed and is looking a little bit worse for wear. And that feeds into that trend that we've been seeing in Crimea, which, as I talked about last night in my sort of news analysis update extra, the FP2s appear to be a very capable munition doing that. So there's been this lack of focus, say some critics of Ukraine, lack of focus on medium range targets, anything from between 50 kilometers and you would say 100 kilometers. But actually, they've now ramped up scaled production, it seems, of FP2 drones, which have a range of 200 kilometers. So this is well out doing the Lancet drone that the Russians have used so effectively, that X-Wing drone that operates, well, initially to 40 kilometers. I think they've increased the range of that to 70 kilometers, increased the warhead to, say, 3.5 kilograms or something like that. So the Lancet might do a job on a tank or an infantry fighting vehicle. It also might just bounce off it. They're not the most successful drones when they do hit Lancets. Well, the FP2 drone packs a 105 kilogram warhead, apparently. It can operate up to 200 kilometers, and I think it struggles to be jammed. So made by Firepoint, like the FP1 and the Flamingo, the FP5. It's, there's the imagery of 20 attempted strikes on this one base for the 810th Separate Brigade. 19 of them were successful, so absolutely hammered. I mean, you can see them from this video. At certain times there are just like 4 or 5 fires going off in separate places. The FP2s inflict damage on the location of Russian Rubicon unit. So in another incident, they've hit the base of a Rubicon unit. The Rubicon unit is a drone unit that is doing incredibly successful work for the Russians, and these would be target number 1 for the Ukrainians. And it looks like they are going after Rubicon, and they are using FP2 drones to do that. They pack a significant punch. As no report says, a leading drone development, FP2, made by Firepoint kamikaze drone, struck a Russian drone unit stationed in the town of Ukrainsk in Donetsk, targeting the drone hunters' drone style. Now, here are some of the details. So 100 kilogram warhead, 105, some people are saying. FP2 follows the designs of the FP1 long-range drone, which is used to strike targets in the Russian rear. However, its range has been reduced from the 1,400 of the Lyuti-style drone. Looks like a big Lyuti with that V-shaped thing at the back. Pretty large, actually gets catapulted, that one, rather than have wheeled landing gear, which the Lyuti does. But anyway, that's for sort of going for targets at a distance of 1,400 kilometers or whatever. But they've potentially adapted that to be also a medium range drone, as you can see with the FP2. So operating up to 200 kilometers with a really significant warhead. So that's excellent news for the Ukrainians. Just a bit of an update. And I said last night that could be a game changer, by the way. So if they are able to use 105 kilogram warheads and they have a scaled up production of them, then they are able to do at a snip of the cost. So I don't think these are hugely expensive. They are going to be able to achieve what Storm Shadows might otherwise achieve. Now, they won't have the bunker busting capabilities, but they do have the ability to absolutely take out these command nodes and troop accumulations and material and whatnot. Something to look out for in the coming days and weeks. Now, Max25 here says on the night of September the 17th to 18th, so this was a few nights ago, an attack was carried out on an ammunition depot. And I did show you this video, or had an image of this, but I didn't really talk too much about what was going on in it. Belonging to the Russian 17th Tank Regiment of the 70th Motorized Rifle Division of the 18th Army in Luhansk region. Okay, so this attack seems to have been pretty successful. And we understand it was carried out on an ammunition depot belonging to that tank unit. And then here we have an article from the Kyiv Independent, which is entirely in line with what I've been discussing. Now, I have been speculating that the Ukrainians have been hitting the Russian military-industrial complex, and the Russians have been hitting the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, and the Ukrainians have been keeping quite quiet about that. We don't really hear about it. But I've also been saying, well, look, the Ukrainians, we hear reports that they've sent 300 drones over tonight, and this source says, 100 in this area, 70 drones over Crimea or something like this. And then the next day you get an odd bit of imagery from here and there, but generally not as much proof of the success of the Ukrainian attacks as we used to hear earlier in the war. So what's going on? Is there better OPSEC, or are the Russians getting better at shooting down the Ukrainian drones? And the answer is probably both. The Ukrainians are getting relatively few drones through. The Russians are doing a job on them there. There was talk the other day about Ukrainians hitting the Russian rear, and it could be that something like 2 out of 20 drones succeed in getting through. So you've got another 18 drones that costing whatever much money, just getting taken down by air defense, and that appears to be the cost you've got to pay. But anyway, one of the theories for why we're not hearing or seeing so much evidence for these strikes, there's no battle damage assessment, could well be, as the Kyiv Independent says, new restrictions on sharing footage of Ukrainian air attacks are making it tougher than ever to figure out what is going on in Russia. So we're just going to dip into this article for a second. So the article talks about, usually you get to see videos of all this stuff getting blown up and fires and whatnot. It says, but over the past year, Moscow has increasingly banned the distribution of attack footage in some areas in an apparent attempt to stave off panic at home, complicating appraisals of Russia's air campaigns. So I've told you, I'm just not sure how successful the Ukrainians are being. The September 8th attack displayed a new level of sophistication in Ukrainian air assaults. The disparate ways the Ukrainian and Russian sources propagated news of these strikes, the airstrikes, further demonstrated tightening Russian censorship on footage of such attacks. If Russian society gets more information about successful Ukrainian attacks inside of Russia, then that definitely undermines the society's faith in Russia's omnipotence as a state, says one source. Clips of the same attack propagated by outlets aligned with the Russian military feature a haze of digital blur surrounding decontextualized fire and focus on the apparent death of a civilian in what they term liberated territory. But Russia refers to occupied, so how Russia refers to occupied Ukraine. On the morning of September the 11th, Vyacheslav Gladkov, the governor of Russia's Belgorod Oblast, said there had been another Ukrainian attack in the region as well as the city of Belgorod, one of the largest Russian municipalities near Ukrainian-controlled territory. Quote, more than 30 unmanned aerial vehicles simply fall in different regions of the city, trying to sow panic, Gladkov wrote. So the details available from the Belgorod attack are deliberately much less vivid than those on Donetsk and Makivka. In an effort to cut off this panic, Gladkov just last week banned the distribution of unofficial photos and videos from drone strikes. Quote, only information that has been published by official representatives of government agencies is permitted to be distributed. Gladkov wrote on the 3rd, quote, government authorities and security agencies are now authorized to publish information first, after which media outlets and other sources, Telegram channels, social networks can distribute it. In other words, they are keeping a tight control over what people are learning concerning battle damage assessment. The present ban is aimed at hiding and complicating evaluation of the results of drone attacks on Russia's military and energy infrastructure, says MOLFAR, which is a Ukrainian-based investigation and analysis group. As far back as May, one Ukrainian intelligence officer noted an informational disparity, telling the Kyiv Independent, quote, while practically all of their hits on us are known, you have to add up our known strikes on them and multiply that number by 2. So, for example, if we talk about 2 refineries being hit, there's probably 4 major targets that have been hit overnight. There's much more in that article. You can go and read that at your leisure. We'll now finish off with other bits and pieces, and we're going to start with if you're flying in Western Europe today, you may be subject to delays or cancellation, and suspicion immediately falls on Russia. So there's been a massive cyber attack disrupting airports in Brussels and Berlin, I think were the worst hit. Then you've got London Heathrow being hit as well. This is really significant, and I wonder if it is found out to be Russia, what gets done about it. But certainly air travel is heavily affected across Europe today as a result of cyber attacks. Now, US senators are seeking to sanction Russia's shadow fleet, according to the Financial Times. A bipartisan group of US senators plans to introduce legislation on September the 19th to tighten sanctions on Russia's so-called shadow fleet of oil tankers. Now, hopefully this won't be like the Blumenthal-Graham bill, which requires Trump's kind of oversight, ultimate decision, rather than a Congress deciding things and it getting signed off by Trump, but it's really coming from Congress. This is like, here's a tool for you, Donald Trump. You can use this as you wish. And then Trump says, I'm not really bothered about sanctioning them at the moment. So it could be good news here that there might be a method for the Americans to at least match what the EU and the UK, Australia and Japan and Canada are stating about the shadow fleet. So they're heavily sanctioning the shadow fleet, which is how Russia makes as much money as they do of hydrocarbons. But the US is sorely missing from the list of countries that are effectively sanctioning the shadow fleet. It's something you have to keep updating, closing the loopholes and adding ships that are then added to the shadow fleet inventory. So hopefully that is good news. Perfect storm, says Jay in Kiev, comes to the Russian economy as a quadfecta of massive tax increases, disappearing oil refineries, expensive war, and economic death spiral come to meet fuel shortages. Price of diesel on the St. Petersburg exchange is en route to being exponential here, he says. Well, he says parabolic, but I think he really means exponential. It is going up at a rate of knots at the moment. Now, that's the price of diesel, and that's super important because that previously we've seen mainly petrol be affected with the strikes on refineries. That affects civilian logistics, but it doesn't affect military logistics so much that depends on diesel. So diesel prices are going nuts, and that means you're going to have a diesel supply chain issue, a diesel supply issue, and that might well have an effect on the war and also the economy much more significantly than petrol in terms of moving products around the country. Now, I had a breaking news update on these 3 MiG jets that were in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. I have heard somewhere else 20 minutes, but anyway, for a significant amount of time, they had their transponders off and were not talking to air traffic control. And eventually, NATO jets were scrambled and pushed those. I think initially there were Finnish jets, and then they were joined by Italian F-35s, and the MiGs then went on their way. I think they were going to Kaliningrad. Estonia's Ministry of Defence has reacted to Russia denying it violated. So Russia denied it violated NATO airspace. Tallinn published a map, and that's come out, I think, this morning, with exact details of the flight path taken by Russia's 3 fighter jets. NATO leaders are expected to meet on Monday to discuss a collective response. So Estonia have demanded an Article 4 invocation, which is when NATO get to go and consult and talk about what they should do, if anything, about this. What many people are asking for is like the Turkish response in 2015 when they shot down a Su-24 that was in their airspace for like 17 seconds, not 12 minutes, 17 seconds, and then they shot it down and blew it up, and yet Turkey and Russia still get on. It's reported that the Foreign Minister of Estonia has summoned Russia's chargé d'affaires over another violation of Estonia's airspace, but we also hear that there was a violation. Well, jets flew over a Polish platform, oil platform in the Baltic Sea, Petro-Baltic platform. Its safety zone was violated. The Polish armed forces and other services were notified. So 2 incidents of Russian jets being a little bit naughty last night or yesterday, and yet, we're waiting to see what happens about it. So the Russians came out with their denials, but it's interesting that Fighter Bomber, who's a prominent Russian Telegram, possibly a still serving Russian pilot, or some say he's not serving, but anyway, Fighter Bomber didn't get the Kremlin memo that the MiG-31s did not violate Estonia's airspace. Quote, to lose track of their location for 12 minutes with 3 aircraft carrying 6 military pilots, of whom theoretically 3 are navigators, that also requires, well, a lot of effort, he says. So a Russian there saying, actually, not recognizing that the Russians didn't do that. He's recognizing that they did do that, and he's not denying it in a way that the Russian MD is. Now, Trump has said we'll see about that. He wasn't happy with that situation, but typical rhetoric from him that kind of punts things off to a vague future. He has said, I don't want to make money from the war in Ukraine, but we are making money because they are buying our weapons. I don't want to be making an absolute killing off this war, but I have just said we're not going to give equipment. We're only going to sell it to the Europeans. And by the way, we're selling it at, what did he talked about, like marking the price up as well. So he is making a pretty penny off aiding Ukraine. Of course, he is not aiding Ukraine. The US is not aiding Ukraine from a kind of moral standpoint. It is the Europeans that are aiding Ukraine by buying this stuff off the US, and the US is just arguably profiteering. Now, Zelensky's been holding a press conference this morning. Here are the main points he's made, as according to Tim White. So 1, talks continue with Poland and Romania about getting them to shoot down projectiles in West Ukraine, so over Ukrainian skies. 2, Russia transferred Marines to Dobropilya and Zaporizhia after Ukraine's fight back there. 3, Kupiansk is being cleared of Russians. That's an area where the Russians are looking quite good at the moment. They've gotten to the north of the city. Zelensky at least claiming that the Ukrainians are clearing the Russians in those areas. I don't know if that's fully true. Ukraine will soon export weapons to allies. I'm going to talk about this in the next military aid video. So they have been giving themselves permission to sell, because it was illegal to sell weapons during the war for obvious reasons. But now they're making certain things that they don't have all that much use for to the capacity that they're making them. One of the things that unmanned surface vehicles, which makes me wonder, what if they do have a load of stockpiles of these vehicles and they're not using them, why don't they just send 200 at Novorossiysk? But the idea is, I guess, that actually the Russians have probably worked out a way of jamming them, or anyway, whatever the reason is, they don't need as many as they are able to make. And I heard also anti-tank weapons, but I was wondering what they are, because they really do need anti-tank weapons. Anyway, there are certain things that they're making that they can sell and actually get a markup on and turn a decent profit in making, and yet they don't need them all for their own war. And this will then allow them to put money in the coffer to run a country or to buy more equipment themselves. So this is seen as a real positive move by some people supportive of Ukraine. Russia has delayed, but Zelensky hopes a prisoner exchange of 1,000 by each side will take place soon. And a Korean-style partition is not worth discussing, so demilitarized zone. There may not be a final peace treaty, a ceasefire, and guarantees are possible without it. So that's what he said. Now, Bloomberg is reporting that Putin sees escalation as a way to force Ukraine into talks, believing Trump won't boost support for Kyiv. Strikes on infrastructure have intensified after Zelensky rejected territorial demands last month. So since Trump's not going to give any more extra aid to Ukraine, we might as well just ramp up escalation, because there are no red lines really for the Americans, is one of the theories there. So Trump's lack of significant boost for Ukraine is emboldening Russia to escalate the war. Now, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Association, adopted a resolution demanding Russia immediately withdraw from the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Wow. It's backed by 62 members, and the document reaffirms that all nuclear facilities must operate under full Ukrainian control. Interesting, they're getting hard on that. Right. And the last two bits, one, I'll deal with this in more detail later, but University of Leeds, that's where I used to go, they have some people, Ukrainians associated with them, have developed a new machine that's a mobile machine that can go on the back of a lorry and drive to areas of destruction and sort out rubble into sand, cement and stone. I presume you wouldn't put other bits and pieces in it. You'd have to cherry pick maybe your aggregates that have been blown apart, but this is a really good way. So usually all the rubble goes to like a low quality, like they get used as broken down ballast or whatever for here and there for landfill or whatever, but actually they can now turn this rubble, and there's so much, 150,000 buildings or something I think is mentioned here. There's a lot of rubble, and during the reconstruction phase, and even right now, Ukraine needs to be able to transform this rubble into much higher quality usable stuff. And they've come up with this amazing machine that can sort like brickwork or whatever, like big cement work, into cement, stone and sand. And then obviously you can use them in the construction of whatever you're replacing it with. And then finally, Keith Kellogg, in an interview here with the Daily Telegraph, had said some pretty significant things. Future improved US-Russia relations will have to be post-Putin. So there's all this idea about normalizing relations with the US, and he's saying no, that can only happen post-Putin. And until Russia rejoins the League of Good Nations, it remains a pariah. That's Keith Kellogg. Now, if only the Trump administration was in complete agreement with you. When asked whether Russia would move to attack a NATO country if it conquered Ukraine, he said, absolutely, you have to look at Putin and Russia as an expansionist power. He wants to re-establish the Russian empire. Just look at history. Give him an inch, he'll take a mile. Reminds me of World War II, etc., etc., etc. So that some of that rhetoric is good coming from an American source. Anyway, that's enough for me. It's been way too long, too much waffling. Do apologise. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.